Life had achieved a perfect golden equilibrium. The terror of abandonment was a distant, resolved memory, thanks to the patience of the dad's hands and the unwavering presence of the mom. I had a schedule, a full belly, and a purpose to be the guardian of peace in this home. I understood that my primary duty was not to fetch or obey, but to observe. I was the house's emotional barometer, and my nose was its finest alarm system. Hook of 10 seconds. The scent of cinnamon and morning coffee is the smell of safety. It's the rhythm of my new life. But on that Tuesday morning, my nose caught something else. A thin, cold thread of odor that smelled like a lie. It began subtly during the morning routine. The dad was making his coffee, that ritual of measured steps, the soft whir of the grinder, the clink of the mug. The kitchen was a fortress of familiar scents: bacon grease from yesterday, fresh fruit, the earthy smell of the morning newspaper. I was lying comfortably on the rug, basking in the sun patch, utterly secure. Then a new scent arrived. It was thin, almost imperceptible to human noses, a cold, brittle edge cutting across the warm flow of the coffee steam. It was a smell I had never encountered here, and my instinct, honed by the desperation of survival, immediately classified it as wrong. It wasn't the smell of danger, like fire or a predator. It was the smell of failure. A synthetic, sharp, and slightly acrid aroma, like plastic trying too hard to be metal, coming from the area behind the stove. My relaxation instantly dissolved. My ears rotated forward, my breathing shallowed, and my entire focus narrowed down to that single offensive odor. My heart, which had learned the rhythm of trust, sped up, remembering the frantic pulse of fear. I knew, with the clarity only a Golden's nose can provide, that something in the silent, safe structure of our home was failing. I stood up, my paws sinking slightly into the soft carpet, and walked slowly toward the kitchen entrance. The mom was sitting at the table, engrossed in a book, oblivious. The dad was bent over the counter, focused on his morning elixir. They were protected by the limitations of their own weak senses. They were blind and deaf to the quiet, creeping hazard. I paused at the threshold, sniffing the air again. The scent was definitely stronger here, originating from the wall behind the older appliances. It was a smell of secret heat and impending, quiet destruction. It was the sound of a system whispering, "I am about to break." I turned my head toward the dad, whining softly, a low, questioning sound, my first attempt at communication. I wanted to use the clear language of trust we had built, but the urgency of the moment demanded a language they didn't share. I was burdened by a terrible secret, trapped in a silent, golden body. Desperate to make them understand that the safety they relied on was an illusion. The equilibrium was gone. My soft whine went unnoticed. The dad, fully immersed in his caffeine ritual, merely reached down and scratched my head, a loving, absent gesture that completely missed the urgency of my communication. "You need to go out, Goldie girl? Hold on a second." I wanted to scream. It is not about the yard. It is about the failing scent. But all that came out was a soft whimper of frustration. I knew my established behaviors worked for simple needs, but they failed catastrophically when dealing with a complex, invisible threat. I tried the next level of communication, escalation through behavior. I went to the mom and nudged her hand, not for a pet, but trying to physically pull her attention toward the kitchen wall. She smiled, misinterpreted my action as a desire for play, and lightly tossed my tennis ball towards the living room rug. "Later, sweetie, mom's reading." The failure felt like a cold, heavy blanket settling over me. They were interpreting my frantic distress signals through the lens of their established, safe routine. They had successfully trained me to be calm, and now my attempts to break that calm were dismissed as a misunderstanding of the rules. The very trust we had painstakingly built was now the barrier to my success. The scent, meanwhile, was growing stronger. It was now acrid, almost sharp, tickling the back of my throat. It screamed heat and danger. I could trace the source precisely, a spot on the wall behind the toaster oven. My instincts screamed for me to bark, to use the loud, undeniable human-level alarm system. But the memory of the past stopped me. Barking aggressively, especially inside, was a violation of the peace. It was a chaotic action, and chaos was what had led to my abandonment. I was trapped between my loyalty to the house's peace and my loyalty to the human's safety. I chose a controlled escalation. I returned to the kitchen threshold and began pacing in a tight figure-8 pattern, whining continuously, directing my body language toward the dad. He finally turned, mug in hand. "Goldie, what is it? Are you hungry again?" he asked, his voice tinged with mild annoyance now. He walked over to the pantry, pulling out the kibble container. He was trying to fix the problem using the only language he understood, food. I stood my ground, ignoring the offered food. I stared at the wall. I whined. I refused the most basic reward system because the reward I truly wanted was their attention to the terrible secret behind the wall. This failure of communication was agonizing. It highlighted the terrifying chasm between our two species. I had the knowledge, the crystal clear, vital truth, and they had the power, but they lacked the dictionary to understand my urgent warning. I felt the profound weight of my loyalty, a feeling so strong it was almost painful. I was willing to sacrifice the comfort of their approval, the peace I had earned, and even the food they offered, just to protect them from the wrongness I smelled. If you understand the profound agony of trying to communicate a vital truth that goes unheard, please share this video with someone you wish would listen closer. And if you're following Goldie's journey, subscribe to the channel to see if her message of danger is finally understood. The threat is growing and time is running out. Frustration turned into desperation. The dad, having dismissed the danger as hunger, had now moved on to his next routine, putting the final touches on his morning bag, which involved plugging in a portable charger at the very counter adjacent to the source of the smell. He was moving closer to the heart of the problem, completely vulnerable. The scent now wasn't just wrong, it was overtly burning. A sharp, almost painful smell of ozone and melting plastic was now undeniable to my hypersensitive nose. The failure was progressing from a subtle whisper to a definite scream. The barrier of language had failed. I had to violate the sacred rules of our peace to get through. I ran into the kitchen, a space I had been taught to enter calmly. I positioned myself directly between the dad and the wall outlet he was about to use. I didn't whine this time. I used the language of absolute, non-negotiable command. I barked. It wasn't a playful yip. It was a sharp, loud, demanding series of barks directed fiercely at the wall and slightly at him. A direct challenge to his authority, a violation of the quiet respect we had built. The dad froze, startled. The noise was shocking in the morning calm. He looked at me, his eyes widening in confusion, then turning to a shadow of disappointment. That fierce, chaotic barking was the behavior of the anxious dog he thought he had cured. He thought this was a regression, a betrayal of the trust he had so painstakingly extended with his hands. "Goldie, no, quiet," he commanded, pointing firmly at the living room rug. His voice was sharp, a tone he hadn't used since the enemy in the glass incident. The tone alone cut deeper than any punishment. I retreated 3 steps, immediately submitting to the form of the command, but my eyes remained fixed on the wall. I knew the consequences of disobedience, but the burning smell was a greater threat than his disappointment. I continued to emit a low, rumbling growl, pointing my nose towards the faulty area, pleading with nonverbal tenacity. The mom rushed in from the dining room, alerted by the sudden aggressive noise. She looked from the scattered tools on the floor, from the previous day's accident, to my frantic, defensive posture. Her expression mirrored the dad's, confusion mixed with genuine sadness over my apparent breakdown. "What is it, honey? Did she Did she see something? The mom asked, her voice cautious. The dad, clearly annoyed and concerned about my regression, shook his head. No, she's just focused on the wall. I think she's fixated on something. Maybe a bug. He stepped past me, toward the outlet, dismissing my warning as a neurosis. I watched him go, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had used the strongest, most confrontational language I knew, sacrificing the peace of the house and risking their disappointment, and it was interpreted as a silly neurosis. The communication had failed completely. I felt the profound loneliness of being the only one who held the truth, but I could not stand down. His step was taking him closer to the danger. I had to prevent him from using that outlet, or the failure behind the wall would become catastrophe. I knew that the ultimate act of loyalty wasn't obeying the quiet command. It was disobeying for the sake of survival. I watched the dad approach the counter, his hand reaching for the charger. This was the point of no return. My frantic barks had been ignored. My body language had been misinterpreted. The smell was now undeniable. A sharp, hot chemical warning that transcended mere odor and became a physical threat. If he plugged that charger in, the fragile, failing connection behind the wall might ignite. I had to act without the barrier of language. I had to use the one form of communication that was universally understood: physical prevention. I violated the final, most sacred rule. I moved without permission and used force. With a desperate burst of speed, I darted forward, not toward his hand, but toward his legs, aiming for a point of leverage. I executed a move I hadn't used since my chaotic days as an abandoned puppy. I grabbed the hem of his jeans, the fabric near his ankle, and gave a sharp, deliberate tug. It wasn't a playful nibble. It was a firm, non-aggressive pull designed to disrupt his balance and halt his forward momentum. The dad was startled. The unexpected force on his ankle pulled his focus instantly away from the outlet. He gasped and looked down, his expression shifting from annoyance to a sharp, surprised alarm. The mom cried out softly from the doorway. "Goldie, what are you doing? Drop it!" the dad commanded, his voice loud. I released the fabric instantly, submitting to the command, but instead of retreating, I stood my ground, trembling slightly, and pressed my nose hard against the wall, right where the odor was strongest. I looked up at him, my eyes wide, pleading, saying with every fiber of my being, "The danger is here, not in my behavior." The abrupt shift in my actions, from an aggressive bark to a non-aggressive physical plea, followed by intense focus on the wall, finally broke through the barrier of their assumptions. The mom took a tentative step closer, her nose wrinkling. "Honey," she murmured, her voice laced with dawning realization. Do you smell that?" The dad paused, his focus still on the spot where I had tugged his jeans. He took a deep, deliberate breath. And then the truth hit him. His eyes widened further. The initial annoyance melted away, replaced by shock, then swift, cold fear. "It's electrical," he whispered, his voice suddenly thick. "It smells like melting plastic, right there, behind the outlet." He immediately dropped the charger, instinctively stepping back from the counter. He moved quickly to the breaker box and flipped the main kitchen circuit, plunging the stove and counter areas into darkness. The hum of the refrigerator ceased. The immediate danger was averted. The smell, cut off from its power source, would still linger, but the acute threat of a fire or a short circuit was gone. The mom rushed to my side, not with punishment, but with a rush of profound, overwhelmed gratitude. She dropped to her knees, pulling me into a fierce embrace, burying her face in my neck. She was shaking, not with fear of the smell, but with the sudden, overwhelming realization of how close they had come to disaster, and how completely reliant they were on the dog whose neurosis they had dismissed. The dad stood over us, his hands trembling, looking from the dead outlet to me. He hadn't just understood the danger, he had understood the cost. I had risked his disappointment, his sharp command, and the fundamental stability of my life just to tug his pants. I had disobeyed my most basic training because my loyalty was greater than my fear. It was the ultimate silent affirmation of my devotion. The silence that descended upon the kitchen was unlike any other we had known. It wasn't the heavy, max-filled silence of grief, nor the anxious silence of fear, but a silence heavy with relief and reverence. The dad stood by the breaker box, his face pale, slowly returning to the overwhelming reality of the near miss. The mom remained on the floor, holding me tight, her initial gratitude deepening into a profound, speechless appreciation. The intensity of their reaction confirmed everything. I hadn't been imagining the danger. My loyalty had been true, and my instinct validated, even when my language failed. The mom finally released me, but kept one arm wrapped tightly around my neck, grounding herself in my presence. She looked at the dad, and their eyes met, a look that transcended all the quiet conversations they had ever shared. It was a recognition of mortality and a staggering acknowledgement of the small, furry creature who had pulled them back from the edge. We almost didn't hear her," the dad murmured, his voice still ragged with shock. He walked slowly back to the rug, stepping carefully over the scattered tools, and sat down heavily, pulling me gently toward him. He didn't speak a command, he merely rested his cheek against my head, the gesture mirroring the intimacy we had achieved during the Dictionary of Hands test. This was the true, final integration. They hadn't just accepted me as a loving companion. They had accepted me as a vital, sentient partner in their survival. They had learned the depth of my commitment, that my loyalty was a force willing to sacrifice the peace of the house for the safety of the pack. I realized that the greatest challenge of our lives wasn't learning to live without Max, it was learning to listen to each other in the new configuration of our pack. Humans rely on words and sight, blind to the subtle, powerful truths carried on the air. I, the dog, carried the truth, but lacked the voice. The accident, the terrifying, sharp sound of the failing circuit, was the final, destructive force necessary to tear down the wall of human assumptions and force them to trust a sense they had ignored. The dad began to run his hand over my back, not the tentative, careful hand of the past, but a firm, confident, and deeply reassuring stroke. He was speaking the language of touch now, confirming the unbreakable bond forged in the face of disaster. I knew without a doubt that no raised hand, no sharp word would ever be a source of fear again. Our trust was absolute. The mom, still recovering, walked to the kitchen and slowly, deliberately brought me my food bowl. She didn't just set it down, she knelt, holding it until I took the first bite. It was a small, profound ritual that acknowledged my hunger, not just for food, but for validation. The truth I learned on that terrifying morning was this: the barrier of language is nothing compared to the power of loyalty in action. Sometimes you must be willing to violate the rules of the house, to bark, to growl, to pull the hand away, to save the very people you love. If they truly value you, they will eventually look past the chaotic behavior and see the pure intention behind it. Your instinct for self-preservation must sometimes give way to your higher instinct for pack preservation. Never assume that your most important messages will be heard through gentle means. If the stakes are high enough, you must be brave enough to be loud, disruptive, and uncompromising in your love. That is the definition of true, life-saving devotion. I had done more than save their lives. I had taught them a profound lesson in listening. And in listening, they gifted me the final, absolute certainty of my forever home. If this story has reminded you that listening goes beyond words and that the deepest loyalty often requires the greatest risk, please give this video your most heartfelt like. It's the silent acknowledgement that Goldie saved the day. And for all the future stories, for every hidden secret and quiet danger that Goldie might face, make sure you are subscribed to Tales of a Golden Heart right now and ring that notification bell. Our pack is complete, and the most vital stories are the ones we share together.